Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great week so far. My name is Maddie. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm a white person with blonde and brown hair, wearing clear glasses and a beige shirt. And today we have a wonderful webinar for you all about voting with a disability in Florida. And throughout the presentation, we're going to have slide backgrounds that are in this really pretty purple, orange, and light yellow DRF, Disability Rights Florida slideshow theme. So before we get started with some of the content, we are going to discuss a few accessibility things with Zoom. First, let's cover caption options and ASL. If you need closed captioning, we have it provided within Zoom and through a separate stream text link that will be provided in the chat. You can turn on closed captions clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Like I mentioned, there's the external caption viewer as well, and you can click that link and view the captions in real time in a separate window. Finally, we have two wonderful ASL interpreters here that are spotlighted on your screen. So if you are not able to see them, make sure you have opted into viewing the participants with video and see them highlighted in your top right corner. Next, we'll cover submitting questions throughout the presentation and the recording of this webinar. There's a Q&A button provided on your Zoom little info bar, located typically at the bottom of your screen, where you can provide questions throughout the presentation that we'll answer at the end. Also, we'll be checking our email at webinar@disabilityrightsflorida.org. And you can ask questions there and we'll make note of them and ask them at the end. You can, like I said, you can submit any questions at any time and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. We are currently recording, and this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website and our YouTube channel for you to go back and listen to, or if you didn't make today's webinar, you can watch it later. Finally, DRF does not offer any certificates or credits for this webinar, so your attendance is simply for your own knowledge and sharing information with your colleagues and community. So I am delighted to introduce our speaker today. Today we have Laura Lee Minutello presenting, and Laura Lee is the public policy analyst at our organization, Disability Rights Florida, as well as a self-advocate with cerebral palsy. In addition to working on DRF's, Disability Rights Florida's, broader policy agenda, Laura began her career at DRF as the agency's voting access advocate and currently oversees all of DRF's voting work, helping to protect the right to private and independent access to the ballot box for Floridians with disabilities. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University of Central Florida and is currently working towards a Master's of Nonprofit Management that's also from UCF, the University of Central Florida. So as I kick it off to my lovely colleague, Laura, we're going to begin with a poll question. Take it away, Laura.
Awesome. So we just wanted to get a sense of what you guys already know about disability voting. So we have a poll question for you and I'll read it. It says, how much do you know about disability and voting? And then you can select an answer. I know just a little, I know some, or I know a lot about this topic. And while you guys are doing that, I will share some descriptions of myself. I'm a Italian appearing woman with glasses and freckles, and currently I am wearing a black top with a pink blazer, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'll give you guys just a minute for the poll question, and then we will jump into our agenda and an overview of what we're gonna cover today. Keith, when you're ready to flash the results, or I don't know if we can put the results up for. Okay, so some of you know, most of you, it looks like know. Oh, some info. Some of you know a lot, and some of you know just a little. So that's a good mix, and let's jump into it. So we're going to be covering quite a lot today. If I go through something and you have a question, as Maddie said, we'll be answering them at the end, but I'm happy to recover anything that I went through too fast at the end. So don't feel shy in asking questions. First, we're going to cover a little bit about Disability Rights Florida, and then we're going to go through some important dates and deadlines related to voting, as well as Disability Rights Florida's voting hotline and some of the assistance we can provide. We're going to talk a little bit about how to vote in person and by mail as a person with a disability. We're going to talk about congregate settings and rights restoration. So those who may have lost their voting rights for some reason or live in a facility, as well as what a supervised voting facility is. And supervised facility voting, that's a particular process that Florida has. And also how to submit a voting access complaint if you feel that your rights to the ballot have been denied or not fulfilled in some way as a person with a disability. And then we're going to have a Q&A. So first off, just a little bit about Disability Rights Florida for those of you who may not be aware of what we do. We are something called the Protection and Advocacy Agency. There is 57 of those, one in every state and territory, and we aim to advocate, educate, investigate, and litigate to protect and advance the rights and dignity and provide equal opportunities for self-determination for people with disabilities. So DRF was founded, a little history lesson if you may or may not know, in 1977, and was a reaction to a expose that Geraldo Rivera did on the Willowbrook Institution, and just some of the conditions that people were living with there. And we were a part of what's called the Developmental Disabilities Act. So it's a federal act that provides our funding under 9 grants to protect the rights of people with disabilities. We also have something called Access Authority, which is a power that other agencies don't have. And that allows us to go anywhere where people with disabilities are housed or lived or served and make sure that they are protecting individuals with disabilities. So we're going to kick it off with some important dates and deadlines and then some information about our hotline. So coming up really soon on October 7th is the deadline to register to vote. You have to be registered to vote by that time or you will not be able to vote in the general election in November. After that, on October 24th, we have the deadline to request a vote by mail ballot. This is important because recently there was a change in law where you have to request a vote by mail ballot after every election cycle. And so there's some confusion because the roles were cleared. So if you haven't requested a vote by mail ballot between now and the last election, which would have been November 2022, and you want to vote by mail, you have to re-request. And you also have to re-request before after the general election. So whereas that wasn't the case before, now vote by mail ballots only last through a general election cycle. And that would cover every election within that cycle, or you can just say, hey, I want to vote just in the general election. You have the option. On October 25th, early voting begins. It is best to contact and look at your county's supervisor of election website to see when their particular hours and days are. Not every county does early voting the exact same way. October 29th is the deadline to send back a vote by mail ballot through the mail to make it to your supervisor of elections in time. But you can, if you miss this deadline, you are able to drop off your vote by mail ballot at the SOE office in a drop box. You can even go to your polling place and do that. So there is an opportunity to do that if you miss that deadline. November 2nd is when early voting ends, and November 5th is election day, and that is the deadline to drop off your vote by mail ballot. And typically on election day, the polls close at 7 p.m. But it's really, really important to know that, let's say there's a long line and you get there at 6. You can stay in line. If you are in line to vote and you're voting in person, you have the right to vote. So the polls have a closing time, but do not feel at all like you should or have to leave. You will be able to vote if you are in line by that time. So Disability Rights Florida has a voting rights hotline that really aims to help and answer any questions that individuals have around voting. So you can call us really with any question that you have as a person with a disability. But I'll give some examples of the kind of things that we can answer. We can help you find your information for your supervisor of elections. We can help you sort out those dates and deadlines I just mentioned. We can help you if you're having access issues on going to the polls. So let's say you go to vote and you have a disability and there's disability related concerns and you're not able to vote because of that. You should absolutely give us a call. That number there is 877-352-7337. And it runs from now until election day. So you can call us at absolutely anytime. So now we're just going to do a brief overview of the laws that protect disabled voters. Some of these are a lot more broad than what I'm going to cover, but just to give you an overview. So generally, there are a number of laws that protect those with disabilities. The first that we may be more familiar with is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, signed in 1990. This is kind of the broad civil rights legislation. It's the broadest civil rights legislation to date in this country, and it protects people with disabilities in a variety of situations where they need public access. Now, interestingly, the ADA is kind of misunderstood in that, things are grandfathered in. That's really not the case, but there are limits to some places that the ADA covers, and one of those happens to be places of worship. So churches, synagogues, mosques, places like that are not subject to the ADA under their normal operating procedures. However, churches, synagogues, mosques act a lot of times as polling places. And when they are acting as a polling place, they do have an obligation to conform to ADA standards. So it is still a problem if you are not able to get into those facilities to vote. They become what is called a place of public accommodation. Then we have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act of 1984, the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, and then also something called the Help America Vote Act of 2002. And generally, each one of these laws do something a little bit different, but they provide a private and independent vote for those with disabilities. They ensure that polling places have to be accessible, that voter registration systems have to be accessible, that the whole process, vote by mail, and however else you vote has to be accessible. It also, the Help America Vote Act entitles a person with a disability to use there has to be one voting machine that is accessible at every polling place. So a lot of times you'll see a polling place with an accessible voting machine and they aren't plugged in, or people don't know how to use them. That's not okay. You, as a person with a disability, have a right to use and cast your ballot on an accessible machine. And we'll kind of go over a little bit more about that. And also, the voting section 208 of the Voting Rights Act mandates that you can receive assistance from any person of your own choosing other than your employer or union representative. So there's no other restriction other than your employer. I've known of situations where individuals have helped their parents vote, that it's actually been a child. There's no age limit. It's whoever a voter wants to assist them based on a disability, and they cannot tell you that you are not allowed to bring somebody. So we're going to go over some of the protections that you have voting in person. You can vote in person during early voting or on election day. So during early voting, you can actually vote any open location in your county. But on election day, you will need to vote at your polling place. So on your voter registration card, your polling place will be listed. And then there are also tools, which I believe are in the resources section, where you can go on to your county's SOE website and then and find your address. If you can't put in your address and find where you can vote your polling place. But generally that'll be listed on your voter registration. Some things that you are going to need is an ID that has your signature on it. So they need to be able to identify you. And we're going to go through some ID requirements later. I will say though that if you don't have or you can't be identified, you can also vote, or you should inquire about voting provisionally. That would allow you to cast a ballot and be that can be verified later. You can bring a sample ballot that you have filled out in advance, or a piece of paper that includes the details of who and what you want to vote for. So you're allowed to bring that with you. And then, as I said, there must be at least one voting machine in every polling place that's accessible to anyone with a disability. And there's no standard for that, so you just ask to use the accessible machine. Anybody can use it. They are not allowed to inquire about why you want to use it. You just request the accessible machine and they have to let you use that. So just to go over some voter ID requirements in Florida. Your ID must have your signature on it. If it doesn't, so you might be using a passport or something that doesn't, you can bring an extra document with you, including a that has your signature. So it can be a picture or a signature, and those don't have to be the same documents. But some accepted forms of ID are a Florida's driver's license, a Florida state ID card, a U.S. passport or passport card, military identification, student ID, public assistance ID, Veterans Health ID issued by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, a retirement center ID, a neighborhood association ID, a debit or a credit card that has your signature on it, a Florida concealed weapons license, employee ID issued by the U.S. Florida or local government. And if you don't have these documents, I just want to highlight a resource for you all. Vote Riders does a lot of great work in helping people obtain the documents that they need to vote, and we can put those resources in the chat. and it also must be unexpired. I forgot to mention that. So if it's old, they won't accept it. Um, there are generally two accessible voting machines that are in wide use in Florida. There are a couple counties that have a third, but the two most common are the Express Vote and the Image Cast. They work similarly. DRF and our partners at Access the Vote Florida, which is Florida's Rev Up Coalition, which aims to increase access as well through the American Association of People with Disabilities, created these really great explainer videos that I wish we had time to actually play today, but we don't. But in general, what you'll do is you'll go to you'll ask to use the machine, they will set it up for you. They should show you how to use it, but that will allow you to use a touch screen to cast your ballot. And there are also all kinds of different attachments. There's foot pedals and a sip and puff where you can blow through a straw to use that. It will read the ballot to you. So there are a lot of different ways that this can be accommodating, and then it'll print out your answers. It will print out your answers. It'll also take you back through your answers, so you don't have to worry about having not filled something out. But those longer explainer videos do a really great job of explaining how to use it, and I can also answer any questions later that you might have about that. So another option that we have in Florida is vote by mail. And there are two options for those with disabilities. There's standard vote by mail, and then there's something called accessible vote by mail. And they're a little different, but they have to be requested in very much the same way. But there are some extra considerations with accessible vote by mail that we'll also go through. So how to request vote by mail in general. You must be registered to vote. You can't request a ballot before you're registered to vote. You must contact the supervisor of the elections office in the county where you live and ask for a vote by mail ballot at least 12 days before an election. If it's not 12 days before, if you decide, 2 days before that you want to vote by mail, you're not going to be able to do that. But if you requested at least 12 days before, they will send that out. That's their deadline to send it out. For accessible vote by mail, so what you do is you go through the regular request process, which you can do online or in person. But you also will have an opportunity to mark that you need a remote access vote by mail ballot. So you'll receive both a standard paper ballot and the accessible ballot in your email. So you'll receive a standard paper ballot in the mail, just to be clear, and then you'll also receive an accessible ballot through email. What you want to do is you want to fill out the accessible ballot. That they'll basically provide. Each county does it a little differently, but typically they'll provide a link that will take you to the exact ballot that you would have if you were filling out a paper or in-person ballot. And you are able to then just fill that out using your own technology, so your own screen reader, your own things that you need. And then you have to print that out, which unfortunately, yes, it does. We don't have accessible return. So you do need to print that out. You need to follow the same steps that you would with the envelope to put the printed out ballot in the envelope and return it to your supervisor's elections office, either through the mail or in person. And it's really important to also remember that they're going to send you the printed ballot, but you don't enclose two ballots in the same envelope. If you do that, they will not count your vote. So you just want to make sure that you have the one ballot. And you can either print it out, you can either print it out with your printer, or in a secure place. So if you have another secure place to vote, you can use that link. But it does need to be physically printed. Again, we have videos that explain this process. There are two different systems, and through enhanced voting and democracy live, they are generally the same. They are two different companies, sort of similar to the voting machines being two different companies that provide this service, but we have videos that explain both. And again, I would be happy to answer any questions.
This is Maddie speaking. Originally, we were going to play this video because this is a great short 3 to 4 minute video about how to use accessible vote by mail. But just for the sake of time, we're going to move past this for now. But if we have time at the end, we can always come back and play this video for you all. And with that, I think we can go to our next poll question.
Awesome. So I'm gonna read this just for those that might be helpful. And the poll question number 2 is, do Floridians have to re-request a vote by mail ballot each year? Yes or no? Whenever you feel like the results are ready. So we have a little bit of a mixed bag. 57% of you say yes, 43% of you say no. So the answer to this is actually maybe. Um, Generally, yeah, as I explained before, you have to request every election cycle. So if you haven't done that, after this election cycle before after last election cycle, prior to this election cycle, you'll want to do that. So it's every election cycle, not every year, but many people are not aware of that recent law change. So I would go ahead and make sure, especially this year, to that you have it requested. Okay, so we're gonna go on to voting rights and rights restoration, especially those in congregate kind of group settings, is a congregate setting. So Florida allows people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities to request what the law calls supervised facility voting. And it's a bit of a complicated process for those having to request it, but if 5 or more residents ask the administrator of a facility to vote, and the administrator contacts the supervisor of elections in their county, the supervisor will have staff go to the facility, and residents can cast their ballots there. So currently, and this is the complicated part, it doesn't apply to all facilities. It only applies to what the law considers a nursing home or an assisted living facility. But unless your voting rights have been removed, voting rights are also protected in other types of facilities, including groups homes, intermediate care facilities, treatment facilities, and jails. So if your right to vote hasn't been removed, and you want to vote, you have the ability to do so. And if somebody is interfering with that right, you should give us a call and let us try to see what we can do to help. But just know that you do have the right to vote unless it had been removed, and those are specific situations, which I believe we'll go over next. So there are a few situations in Florida where a person may not have the right to vote. One is in a plenary guardianship. So in a plenary guardianship, a person's every right that a person has been removed, and so the right to vote would also have been removed. But there's also limited rights, limited guardianships in Florida, guardian advocacy, and several other alternatives, such as supported decision making, where those rights stay intact. And if the right to vote has been removed, your guardianship order needs to explicitly state that. And in the case of a plenary guardianship, there may be or may not be ways to also get the right to vote back. It would be a case dependent situation. But just because you are under guardianship, I want to state that very clearly, doesn't mean that you don't or couldn't have the right to vote necessarily. A couple situations where you definitely don't have the right to vote is if you have a felony conviction in Florida for murder or sexual offense, unless and until the person's right to vote has been restored by a state clemency board. A person under those conditions, the right to vote has been removed. A felony conviction in Florida where the terms of a sentence, including your payment of fines and fees, is not complete. So you also, in Florida, in general, once your sentence is complete, you have, and you have a felony conviction, you, in many cases, your right to vote is restored. That was a citizens initiative a couple years ago, but unfortunately, that does include the payment of fines and fees. So it's really important that somebody in that situation knows whether a returning citizen in that situation finds out whether their fines or fees are complete. And also a felony conviction in another state, which would remove the voting rights in that state. So if you have a felony conviction somewhere else and their laws are different, their laws are the ones that apply. But if you have the right to vote, you can and should vote for whoever you want. There are no standards. You don't have to take a test. You don't have to have a reason for voting for the person that you want to. You don't have to tell anybody what that reason is. You can literally just like the person's name or like anything about them, just want to vote for them. And you have that right and you should exercise it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about supervised facility voting. We went a little bit over what supervised facility voting was on the last slide, but just to recap, it's a way that people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities can vote. So staff from your supervisors, your county supervisor of elections can come out to the actual facility and bring your ballot and assist with voting, and take your ballot back with them. The supervisors of elections are the main elections officials in the county, and each county has one. So they will be different people. But if you go to the Division of Elections or just search on Google with your county name and supervisor of elections, you would also be able to figure out who that person is. I forgot to mention that earlier. So how do you exercise supervised facility voting if you're eligible? You have to be registered to vote by mail. Because you're not voting at a poll site, the only other way that they would know that you are wanting to vote would be voting by mail. Oh. So when the election staff comes to do the supervised facility voting, they'll bring your ballot with them. The election staff needs to be contacted by your group home administrator, and again, that 5-person limit will be what triggers that. So if it was three people that wanted to vote, they may not come out. They may. It's worth asking and worth telling your nursing home or your assisted living facility that you want to vote. It's worth that regardless of whether they come out or they don't. So the supervisor of elections will contact your facilities administrator and choose the date and time that the voting will happen. So you don't have to do anything. But you should ask them as soon as possible because they have to request it at least 4 weeks, 28 days before election day. So when they come with your ballot, at least 2 staff members will be there. So in a primary election, there's some different examples of this, and I'm going to go through them. In a primary election, supervisor of election staff members from the same political party being voted on will be there. For example, in a Republican primary, something like we just had, Republican SOE staff members will come to do the supervised facility voting. In an election where there's more than one political party on the ballot, such as in November, so there'll be several different candidates on the ballot from different parties, right? In a presidential election, you could have a Republican, Democrat, and independent SOE staff to come and supervise the voting. So they try to match it up with party in a primary election, and then have a mix of, so it's what we call nonpartisan in other elections. And that's just all to protect your right to vote. So what's going to happen? The SOE staff will give you your ballot, and you can, it's the same ballot that they're going to be having on in person or vote by mail. There's nothing different about it. If you need help voting, the SOE staff can help you, or you can ask someone else you trust. And you also don't have to decide to vote that day. You still have the right to vote later with an assistant of your choice. So say they come and you decide, no, hey, I want Laura to help me. And that needs to be arranged at a different time. You don't give up your right to vote because you didn't choose to vote during this process. So, another important thing to know how to do is how to make a voting access complaint if you feel that your rights have been violated. So, we talked a little bit about the Help America Vote Act earlier. The Help America Vote Act was enacted in 2002. Thanks to those of us of a certain age will remember that election and hanging chads and recounts, and just an election that didn't go exactly how it should. But the Help America Vote Act actually does a lot of things for people with disabilities. And so the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, guarantees that people with disabilities have the right to vote privately and independently. So that's where we get the voting machine having to be in the polling places. That's where, that really protects your right, so that if somebody, let's say a voting machine was not in a place where it was private, that would be something where you have so if it's facing a door and everybody can see your vote, that would be a reason to have a complaint. It made voting systems follow a few rules to help you vote, and those are just making sure make sure that's accurate. If you experience issues while voting, one of the things you can do is file that HAVA complaint, and we're going to go through that. So the complaint form is on the Florida Department of State website in both English and Spanish, and it has 3 parts. On the form, it says person bringing the complaint and person or entity against whom the claim has been brought. You would be the person bringing the complaint. So you put your information, your name, address, and phone number in that section. And you next add the contact information for the person or entity you're bringing the complaint against. Usually people write in the Secretary of State because it's the Secretary of State's job to confirm the election results, and that is what I would recommend. You can also put in things like the supervisor of elections in your county, but generally the Secretary of State's job is the Secretary of State is gonna be the best one to put there. So next you want to describe what happened to you. So you want to write what happened at the polling place, or what the person did that caused you to have issues voting. So it's very important that whoever you list, that the complaint follow that. So if you list the Secretary of State because it's their job to enforce these things, that's fine. It doesn't need to necessarily, in that case, be the exact person, or you don't need to have a name of the person. You just want to describe generally, but in a lot of detail, or as much detail as you can, what they did, or why you think your right to vote was made more difficult or impossible. So then they're going to have something called a statement of facts. And this is the longest and most important part of the form, and where you again talk about what happened at the actual poll site. And this will include more of that relevant information that you described generally in the last section. So you want things like the date and time, where it was, well, the name of the poll site if you have it, who was there. This is a section where you would want people's names if you have them. If you don't, it doesn't mean that you can't bring these complaints. So you can also have witness, if there's some witness, if you are with somebody, or there's somebody that witnessed the issue that you're filing the complaint about. This is a good section to put that in. So filling out the complaint. The complaints specifically state that it must be handwritten, and I know that that can be difficult. If you can't handwrite, you can have someone else write it for you, but afterwards you must take it to a notary and sign it. So most banks have notaries. There are plenty of like you can look up a notary in your county and see where a notary would be, but they are just specialized people that have a stamp that can witness it for you. And that has to be signed there. So you can't sign it ahead of time and have them stamp it. You have to sign it with them. And then you can submit your complaint to either the Florida Division of Elections or your local county election office. So what happens after you submit the complaint? The Department of State will decide if your complaint showed a violation of the law. But you also have the right, if they come back and say that it didn't, if you disagree with their opinion, you can request a hearing on the record. This means that you're asking for an explanation about the result, and you're asking them to look deeper into the issue. It's an appeal process. So if they say something didn't happen and you want to go that extra step, you have the right to do that. The Department of State will gather information from everyone about the incident, and once they get all the information, the state will determine if there was a violation or not. If a violation of the law happened, the state will work to fix it. If a violation of the law didn't happen, the state will dismiss the case and the complaint and post their decision online. And I want to say that in this, if the violation of the law happened and the state says that they will work to fix it and give details about that, which they may or may not, but if they do, they and you feel that they aren't being followed, that might be a situation where you're able to give us a call. But in general, if there was no violation, the decision will be placed online. Once you file the complaint, they actually have 90 days to make a decision. So what happens if they don't make that decision within 90 days? They will ask you if they can have more time, and only you have the right to extend the deadline. So if you say no, then it's no. If you don't extend the deadline, the state has 60 days to come to a compromise with you. So this is called an alternative dispute resolution, and a judge will make a decision. It's basically another legal process where they're coming and saying, hey, we haven't had the time to investigate or we don't know. And you're coming to the table and there will be some kind of compromise solution, but it will be a legally binding solution. So we have a nice QR code here that will take you to our website with all the resources and videos that we discussed today. And I believe the website is actually in the chat as well, but there you can find these fact sheets about some of the things that we discussed today. You can find our disability voting rights brochure, and both videos, the accessible vote by mail videos and the voting in person videos, as well as other resources. Our hotline number is there as well. And if you don't see something that you want there, we are happy to try to see what we can do. Go ahead, Maddie.
Yeah, so this is Maddie speaking. We're gonna put up a third poll question.
Okay, so the question is, what rights do voters with disabilities have? And there are a few answers that you can choose from. They can access the ballot privately and independently. They can get help from a person of their choice. They can use accessible voting machines or all of the above. So if you think that it's all of those answers, you press all of the above. If you think it's just one, then you're going to select one.
And after we process this question, we can go ahead and launch the next
You
one.
guys are good. It is all of the above, 100% of you. That is the correct answer. You have all of those rights. And then the last polling question is, what other voting resources, things that we haven't discussed here today, things that you wish we talked more about, would be helpful to you? And you can put in whatever you want. I would say, like, let's not put that on the screen. And we'll be able to go through that though. And hopefully that this will just help the RF and me know what the community needs are. And hopefully get you guys better resources to help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. We'll leave this poll question open for the remainder of the webinar so people can answer it as we close out with some Q&As and additional resources.
So we do have some additional resources. To register to vote, you can register to vote online at registertovoteflorida.gov. That's where you can also request a new vote by mail ballot. You can find your supervisor of elections at the Division of Elections. So that's dos.elections.myflorida.com/supervisors. I don't know. I honestly, Maddie, you can tell us this. Is that a backslash or a forward slash? I never know the difference.
That's a /. You're good.
Okay. You can find your poll site, and we have the little bit.ly code there to help you do that. DRS voting resources page that we just discussed would be found at disabilityrightsflorida.org /voting, or maybe backslash, I don't know. And then we also have a great state voting guide from our friends at the American Association of People with Disabilities that handle our or have our or coordinate the Rev Up coalitions, not handle, coordinate the Rev Up coalitions. And that can be found at www.apd.com/voter info. And there are other states available as well if you know somebody outside of Florida. And lastly, we have New Disabled South's Florida voting checklist, which is really great as well. New Disabled South, along with AAPD, are doing excellent work in the voting space, and that's at www.newdisabledsouthrising.org/Florida voting. So now we get to have a little Q&A. And Maddie, I don't know if there are questions already in or how we want to do this. I'll leave that to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Laura, for your presentation. We have a couple questions so far. So I will read this first one here. Can a person ask for a mail-in ballot and then take the ballot or take their ballot in person to their precinct?
Yes.
Great. Simple answer. Let's see. We answered that one. Someone says thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Let's see if I can think of a good question for you. Or if there's anything else. Right now, there's no other current questions, but if there's anything else that you wanted to clarify or provide.
I actually do have something if there's no questions. I just wanted to mention and especially in a election year, like the presidential election year, there tends to be a lot of focus on the national, as there should, the national election, big election. But one of the best ways to have your voice heard, and most important that a lot of people forget about, not just people with disabilities, are your local elections and your municipal elections, those elections that happen on off year cycles or at different times than the presidential election. Local elections are extremely important, you guys. Maybe even I hate to say it, speculatively more important than something like a presidential election. That's your community. That's where you live. Like, so having your say in your local elected officials is just makes such an impact, and especially as individuals with disabilities, of which I, speaking just on behalf of myself too, as a person with a disability, it can sometimes be more effective to have your voice heard at the local level. Not that all elections are important, and all opportunities to vote is a right that we have, and one that's very important and very serious. But I did want to highlight that it's not just something big like a presidential election. It can even be like a school board election, or a young person, joining their student council. Any opportunities that you have for leadership or civic engagement, really think about that outside of just voting in the presidential election. One of the things that we talk a lot about.
Can I jump in and ask a question
Yeah, go ahead.
before we close out in a few moments?
Yeah.
Could you speak, let me see, what does it say? With someone under guardianship who may or may not know about their right to vote, or are worried about voting or getting support voting from their family, how would you recommend someone vote for the first time or make their own independent decisions?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Maddie. Thank you for that one. Like I said, earlier in the presentation, the only way that somebody under a guardianship would have their right to vote removed, is if the order states that, or they're under a plenary guardianship, which their order will also state. So I think that it's really important to look to have access to those orders, and that if somebody doesn't, there are ways that they can get access to those legally. And then beyond that, say that they have the right to vote and they're being obstructed. That is also a legal problem, but if they just don't know where to go for support or, need support or want a more balanced support than they have, um, I would say that first identify the person that you trust, and ask them for help. And so this is a great situation of, like we talk about with supported decision making, which is an agreement, but can also be used informally, right? So you can go to somebody and say, hey, I really want to vote and I'm not sure, how to go about the process. So you can, have somebody walk through a sample ballot with you and explain if you need that support. And or do you need a ride? You have to identify, I would say identify what you need. And then if you don't know, also just telling people that you need support could be good. But if your support is being obstructed, then you should call us. I have actually had this experience in my life where I've supported somebody to be able to vote, and it's one of the proudest moments of my life. And what I was able to do was help them go through the ballot. But it's really important that anybody helping you do that not make choices for you. That was just to explain what was on the ballot and the support that they needed. But the choice is yours, so that's the thing to keep in mind. And if your supporter isn't supporting you in that way, then we need to work on finding you a different support. And um
Can I
that
jump
may be,
in?
yeah.
Just with 2 minutes left, we have another question in the chat, and then we'll go to our last slide so people can take our end of presentation survey.
Yeah.
So quick question from Melissa. In other facility settings besides ALFs and nursing homes, would you be voting by using mail ballots?
Um, you can vote at, including in supervised facilities that, in ALFs and nursing homes, you can vote any way that you want to. So you could vote by mail, or you could vote in person. And um any supervised or non-supervised, any facility setting should be doing what they can to support a individual to do that. If they are not, that is a bigger problem. But you just because you live in a facility, it doesn't restrict any of the ways that you have to vote, no matter where it is. Except like in a jail, where obviously there's other concerns.
Thank you, Laura.
In treatment facilities, I saw in treatment facilities that you can't leave. Yeah, I mean they should, yes, that they should be providing you with a vote by mail ballot, or some way to exercise that right. If it's a situation out like that where you can't leave. In one where you can leave, you should have the ability to do it any way that you want.
Right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. We are at time, so please take a moment to scan the QR code on the screen. We have a feedback survey that you can provide, feedback to our presentations, to our presenter about how the training went. And thank you so much for attending. And if you want to follow us on social media, or visit our website, we are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, X, everything. So you can find Disability Rights Florida almost anywhere online. And we've provided a bunch of these resources on social media already. So please help us get the word out about folks' disability voting rights and accessibility in voting as we approach the election in just a couple of weeks, honestly. So
Yeah,
thank
it's
you so
gonna
much,
come
everyone.
fast.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, all.